This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, Talia.
Welcome back, everybody. How are you?
I'm doing awesome today.
Well, I'm about ready to ruin that for you. I'm just being
that's
honest.
right. You told me this was a bad one.
This is bad. Do you know the story of the Monster of Belgium?
No.
I can't believe that you don't know this. This is a very famous case in Belgium, and it really caused a lot of heartache in that country. It's a very hard story to listen to. This is a very dark story. That being said, are you ready?
Yes, I'm going to buckle up.
For those that haven't done so already, if you want to maybe take a second to hit the subscribe/follow button on whatever app you're listening to, that would be awesome. That being said, here we go. This story takes place in 1996 in Belgium. The exact date is May 28th. 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne pedaled off to her Belgium elementary school. It was a little after 7 a.m. She got in a new green metallic bike as a gift from her godfather for her first communion a few weeks earlier. So she strapped her backpack to her back. It was filled with her school books. And her father watched her ride off to school. The ride was only about 10 minutes away. It was less than 2 miles from her home. But that day, Sabine didn't make it to school. Sabine would be one of the many young girls who had recently gone missing in Belgium. As Sabine's passing a football stadium on her bike, she's riding along and the hedges on the sidewalk were so thick that they stuck out. So she basically couldn't get down the sidewalk. So instead she went on the road. She heard a loud car approaching her from behind. The muffler was off on it. So she steered towards the right and she waited for this vehicle to pass her. But instead of passing her, this rusty, beaten up old van with these yellow-brown curtains in the windows, it slowed down and it started driving beside her. Before Sabine could even comprehend what was going on, a man with a mustache opened the sliding door and he grabbed her off her bike. She was thrown onto this filthy mattress which reeked of urine on the van's floor. She noticed another man who was wearing an odd hat was driving. So there were two men. As she tried to scream, a handful of pills were shoved into her mouth, and the man with a mustache, he pinned her onto the mattress with a blanket so she couldn't move. But she did manage to spit out the pills. She tried to hide them under the mattress, but the kidnapper, the guy with the mustache, he realized she spit out the pills, so he just forced more down her throat, and he made her swallow them with a Coke. A few minutes later, Sabine was forced into a large toolbox, or a trunk, it was described, that was in the van, and a metal lid was closed on her, which just sounds terrifying. Even though Sabine was very small for her age, she was only 4'9", she could barely fit in this box. After about 2 minutes of her being in the box, the van came to a stop, and the men grabbed the toolbox with Sabine in it, and they brought her inside a 3-story brick house in Marseille, Belgium. This house was nestled in between other similar homes, and both sides of the house, they share walls with the neighbors, so there's no space in between the houses. It's like how we in the United States would think of it as a townhome. Sabine knew by the very short car ride that she wasn't too far from her home and that she was probably still in Belgium, but she lived near the border. The men released Sabine from this suffocating metal box, and the one with the odd hat, he left, leaving Sabine alone with a man with a mustache. This guy brought her to a room on the first floor, and there were children's toys and a small cot in the corner of the room. Also in the room was a staircase that led upstairs, and there was another set of stairs that led downstairs. The main floor area was covered with bricks, cement bags, and tools, as if some sort of construction had just taken place. To Sabine, this didn't appear to be an ordinary home where someone lived. Something was just off with it. And she was right. This house wasn't her sadistic captor's primary home, but just a place for him to hold his prey. Sabine was offered a cup of milk, and then she was forced up the stairs that led to a second-story bedroom. In that room, there were bunk beds and a very large dinosaur poster on the wall. There, Sabine was ordered to undress, and a 3-foot chain was put around her neck, and then that was padlocked to the ladder of the bunk bed. A bucket was placed next to her for her to use for the bathroom, and then the mustache man left her alone. Sabine looked at her watch, and it was 10:30 in the morning, only 3 hours into what would be an 80-day nightmare for her.
Oh my God, 80 days?
80 days. But Tanya, she's one of the lucky ones.
So she lived? Oh my God, I can't even imagine.
The next day, Sabine woke up with this pounding headache from the drugs that she was given earlier. The man with the mustache came into the bedroom where she was still chained, and he explained to her that he worked for a brutal and powerful boss that hated her father because he was a cop. He said her parents and the police had been contacted, and they were told that Sabine could be released if they paid $1 million to the mustache man and his boss. But this was a lie. This was all part of a well-planned mind game that he would play on Sabine during her captivity. The chain that was around Sabine's neck, it was removed, and she was taken to a different room that she felt was probably the room he slept in when he was there. It seemed like it was his bedroom. Even though there was a bunch of women's clothes and children's clothes hanging up in the closet and on the floor, there was a lot of his clothes there too. Sabine would eventually refer to this as the agony room.
Oh no!
There, she was sexually molested and forced to pose for Polaroid pictures. Sabine cried hysterically, but this seemed to only arouse him more. When he was finished doing the sick things he did to her, he brought her back to the bunk beds and chained her up to the ladder, again by her neck. The psychological games that he played continued the next day. Sabine was informed that her parents and the police refused to pay a ransom for her return, and now his boss wanted her dead. He pretended to be her savior. He told Sabine that he had a plan to keep her alive. In his house, he had constructed what he called the secret place. He would tell his boss that he killed Sabine and then hide her in this, quote, safe place, end quote. Sabine trusted him, having no idea that she was being taken into the dungeon of a serial killer. The mustache man walked her down a cement staircase that led to a 9-foot by 3-foot cellar. Attached to one of the walls of the cellar were metal shelves, and on the shelves there were cases of beer and water bottles. The man cleared off the stuff on the shelf, and then he took the bottom lower shelf and he lifted it up, and the entire section of wall that the shelving unit was attached to opened up vertically. Behind the wall was a small half-ton concrete door. He opened that door, and when that door was open, there was a small gap. There's a small, tiny area, and then there was a metal grill in one of the walls in that little area. This metal grill served as another door. Behind that was a tiny cement room, painted yellow, with a ceiling so low that no one, even Sabine, could stand up in. In the secret space, there was a wooden shelf affixed to the wall. Sabine was allowed to put her glasses, paper and pencils, her school books, and some crayons on it. On the ground was a tiny, nasty, stained twin mattress. Above the mattress was another shelf, and that had a TV and a Sega game console. The TV itself didn't work. It was only functional with the game console. Sabine was given a bucket that was placed in the corner that served as her chamber pot. The man took pride in explaining to Sabine how he had built that secret space himself. He bragged about installing a state-of-the-art ventilation system to help circulate fresh air. The entire dungeon area was only 4 feet by 6 feet. Again, and it wasn't very high up, so she couldn't walk around. She couldn't barely even move around there. This would be Sabine's home, a space she would eventually have to share for the next 77 days. Before he left her alone in the dungeon that third night, he brought her some cartons of milk, some water, some bread, and he told her he was going on a mission and he was going to be gone for a few days. Confused and terrified, Sabine was now trapped alone in this hellhole. Days later, he returned and a daily routine of sorts began to form for Sabine. She'd be taken upstairs from the dungeon to a small kitchen area and given very tiny amounts of food while her captor ate whatever he wanted in front of her. On top of the refrigerator, there was a phone, but it was just too high for Sabine to reach. And she was told that that phone had a direct line to the mustache man's boss's headquarters. It was a headquarters hotline. But one time she heard the man making kissing sounds to someone he called Michele. Every day she would be molested, and more pornographic photos and videos were taken of her. Her captor repeatedly told her that her parents didn't care enough about her to pay the ransom, and that he was doing her a favor by saving her life and hiding her. Although he never beat and he never hit her, he would frequently threaten to do so when she resisted his advances. After weeks of being held completely naked, Sabine was able to convince this man to let her at least put on some underwear and some shorts. It was very cold in that cellar area that she was kept in. Bored with nothing to do in her prison, Sabine created a calendar of sorts and journaled her days being held hostage. In this journal, she wrote that it was almost a bit of a relief when she was brought upstairs to his bedroom. Even though she knew he was going to do really sick sexual things, at least she was out of that dungeon for a while. On June 21st, so this is 3 weeks after her kidnapping, the man told Sabine that he had to leave on a trip east and he was going to be gone for a while. He left her some canned food, some juice, and some moldy bread. But he also left her with a clock radio to keep her company. And while he was away, on the radio, she heard a news story about the 1-year anniversary of the kidnapping of 2 young girls in Belgium named Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau. And forgive me if I pronounce so many of these things wrong because I've never been to Belgium. I don't speak French. I don't speak any of it. So I'm doing my best with an English accent to say a whole bunch of things I probably have no business saying. That being said, Sabine remembered hearing about the girls' disappearance and seeing posters of them. Melissa and Julie were 8-year-old classmates from Grosselones in southern Belgium. On June 24th, 1995, as I said, 1 year earlier, they went for a walk to a bridge where they liked to stand over and wave to the traffic below. Then they just disappeared. At that time, Belgium didn't have a good system in place to find missing children. And that's putting it nicely when I say that. They didn't have any leads. So the 2 girls' parents hired a private detective and a criminal profiler, which I thought was really interesting, to help provide information on who might have kidnapped their daughters. This profiler told the police that they needed to be looking for someone that was unemployed, he would be married in his mid-30s with children, and he would have a criminal history of abducting and torturing children.
Wow, that's really specific.
It was really specific. And police knew of a man who matched this profile to a T. He was 38-year-old Marc Dutroux. Marc was an unemployed electrician. He was married to a woman named Michele Martin, and together they had 3 children. Marc also had a very long history of hunting young girls. 10 years earlier, Marc, along with some accomplices, including his wife, abducted, tortured, and raped 5 girls between the ages of 11 and 19 during a 7-month period. They let the girls go, though. Photos and videos of the rapes and of the girls in provocative poses were taken. In addition, Marc, along with someone else, robbed a 58-year-old woman and tortured her by cutting her vagina with a razor blade.
Oh.
Now, this is where you're going to start getting really pissed, okay? A year later, Marc and his wife and only one of the accomplices were arrested. The accomplice's name was Jean. Jean admitted to kidnapping even more girls with Marc that were never identified. For these crimes, Marc got sentenced to 13 and a half years. His wife, Michele, got 5 years, and Jean got 6.5. Are you ready for this? Marc was released after 3 years.
Why?
Well, I don't know.
That's jacked up.
For 5 kidnappings and rapes.
3 whole years.
He got 5 years. And the real kicker is that during his time in prison, he was able to convince medical professionals that he had anxiety and insomnia, and he was prescribed sedatives and sleeping pills. As a result, after his release, Belgium gave him $1,200 a month to live off of for his disabilities.
What?
And he got monthly prescriptions for these sedatives and sleeping pills, which he used to subdue his future victims.
I am completely flabbergasted.
Oh, it gets even worse.
The government paid him.
Monthly,
and gave him free prescription medication.
Yes. His wife, Michele, and his accomplice, Jean, were also released early. Keep buckled up, because the craziness is just beginning. It's very upsetting, this story. Surprise! It didn't take long for Marc to restart his sadistic rampage. Not only did Marc continue to abduct and rape young girls, he also participated in a car theft ring, and he had involvement with drugs, selling drugs, moving drugs, trafficking drugs. With the money he made from the car theft ring and most likely selling young girls in an international pedophile ring, Marc was able to buy 7 houses in Belgium, some of which he rented out to tenants. In 1993, so this is only a year after he got out of prison, and this is 3 years before Sabine's kidnapping, Marc was hanging out with one of his tenants. His name was Claude. They were in Marc's car, which was parked on the street, and they saw 2 young girls walk by. Marc asked Claude to help him kidnap the girls. He suggested that they approach them from behind and hit them over the heads and drag them to his car, then lock the door. He also described other methods he'd used to abduct girls, such as something that sounded a lot like putting chloroform over their face. And he told Claude that each girl was worth about 150,000 francs on the black market. And I don't know what francs in 1993 equates to as far as American dollars now. But Claude refused to go along with this and had Marc drive him home. Once Claude got home, he went to the police and he made a report about Marc, but nothing was ever done about it. A year later, in 1994, someone tipped off the police that Marc was building that secret dungeon in one of his houses so he could hold young girls captive. The police went to that house and they saw in the cellar that Marc was working on some sort of construction there. However, Marc managed to convince the officers that he was just renovating the basement. So they left, and nothing further happened.
And they never followed up.
Nope. Clearly. Marc got really paranoid about getting caught, having them do a follow-up. So he abandoned creating the secret room in that particular house. And instead, he started making one in his Marcinal home, the home that Sabine was now being held in. When it was finished, Marc's wife, Michele, she painted it yellow for him.
Oh, how lovely of her.
And did I mention she was an elementary school teacher?
Are you kidding me?
No.
Oh my God. What the fuck is her problem?
I don't think we have enough time in this episode for that. Anyway, when the dungeon was complete, and this is in June of 1995, Marc, his wife Michele, and an accomplice named Bernard Weinstein decided it was time to find some people to fill the dungeon up. Michele drove the van while Marc and Bernard hunted for victims. They spotted Melissa and Julie, the 8-year-olds, on the bridge. Michele stopped the van, and Marc and Bernard snatched the girls up. After tossing them into the vehicle, Marc shoved sedatives down their throat, and he took them back to his house in Marcinelle. There, Melissa and Julie, I think they were in 2nd grade, they were chained, raped, and then thrown in the dungeon. And this went on, Tanya, for months. Meanwhile, the Belgian police, it's called like B.O.B., Bob, I don't know, Bob, the Belgian police, they were desperate to find the girls. One detective in particular, his name was René Michele, he suspected that Marc could be involved with the abductions. I mean, hello.
Hello, he's a pedophile.
People have been saying he's building cells.
And his creepy wife.
And hey, he's mentioned to friends, let's maybe kidnap some people. I don't know. Plus the profile.
Right.
I mean, hello, ding, ding, ding. Anyway, as I said, Officer Michele suspected Marc could be involved in the abductions. He was part of the gendarmerie. I think it's a national policing unit. He started what was called Operation Othello. And this was a surveillance that he started on Marc's house. There was video equipment, and sometimes he would watch Marc's house personally. What's really stupid about this, Tanya, is the surveillance always ended at 10 p.m.
What the hell? Really?
Yes, he stopped all surveillance at 10 p.m. And the cameras were only used 2% of the time. So there really wasn't this great Operation Othello like you might think with surveillance.
Because nothing bad happens after 10 p.m.
It does with me. Everything bad.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Everything bad happens about after 10 p.m.,
Yeah,
coincidentally.
that's when it gets started.
Operation Othello was basically Officer Michele's sole project. He didn't get along with local authorities. As I said, he was a Belgium officer. So he kept everything he found out pretty much to himself and didn't share it, which is just the stupidest thing to do.
You think you would tell the police in that city?
No, his ego was too big. Marc and Bernard, they didn't know they were being watched. And their appetite for young girls wasn't satiated by 8-year-olds Melissa and Julie. They wanted more girls to abuse. So 2 months after they kidnapped Melissa and Julie, on August 23rd, they set out to abduct more young girls. 17-year-old Anne Marchal and her 19-year-old friend Afia Lambrix had convinced their parents to let them go on vacation with some other friends to this northern Belgium seaside town of Blankenberg. On a Tuesday night, Anne and Afia, they went to a magic show at a casino. And there was a hypnotism. So there's videos of them being hypnotized by the magician. Then they're seen on video surveillance at a train station, taking a train that was headed back near their vacation house. But they were never seen alive again. Marc and Bernard spotted them walking down the road, snatched them up, drugged them, and brought them back to the Marcinelle house. Since the dungeon was occupied by Melissa and Julie still, Marc and Bernard chained Anne and Afia to the bunk beds upstairs. Marc's wife, Michele, rented video equipment and helped videotape the men sexually abusing the girls. 2 days after being abducted, Afia managed to partially escape from a bathroom window while shouting for help, but Marc quickly was able to grab her and get her back in the house. Keep in mind there's surveillance.
Right. Where's the surveillance now?
Exactly. That's the part that pisses me off. For being under surveillance, he just managed to kidnap 2 girls.
Yeah, like they had to bring them back.
Yes, they did.
And she's bringing video equipment into the house that she rented.
10. Must have been after 10.
Everything must have happened after 10.
On September 4th, Officer Michele received a handwritten letter from Janine Lauren. You know who she is?
No.
Marc's mother.
Oh, boy.
She knew her son was a danger, and she opposed his release in 1992 for the 5 kidnappings. In her letter, she stated that Marc's neighbors had told her they were very suspicious of Marc's activities. There were a lot of noises coming from the cellar. His windows were covered with something that blacks them out. And they'd seen 2 girls whom they believed to be about 18 and 16 years old in the garden, but only at night. For reasons unknown, Officer Michele didn't immediately follow up on that tip.
Why would he?
He's busy doing surveillance. Oh, wait, that's not it. He's a very sore subject in the country of Belgium.
Oh, I bet.
But he did get promoted. Spoiler alert.
Of course. Oh, man, the system is the best.
You're going to get so fired up. By the time I'm done with the story, you're going to be on fire. Later on in September, Marc and Bernard decided having 4 captives got too much. And they chose Anne and Afia to die. After doping Anne and Afia up, Marc and Bernard forced them into the van and took them to another one of Marc's homes. In the backyard of the house, there was digging equipment. Marc had rented almost like a small bulldozer, and he had dug a 10-foot hole in the corner of his yard. In their drugged up state, Anne and Afia were forced out of the van, and they were thrown in the hole. Marc and Bernard used digging equipment to bury them alive.
That's just terrible. So they were only watching the one house, right? There was surveillance only at that one house.
That's my understanding. If there's anything more, I don't know if they were only watching that one house, because it really doesn't sound like they were watching any houses. Mm-hmm. But I know for a fact they were watching at least that one house. Obviously, Tanya, they're not concerned about digging equipment in the backyard.
Right.
After Afia and Anne's murders, Marc and Bernard kidnapped 2 guys. They were in their late teens, named Philip and Pierre, along with Philip's girlfriend. Philip and Pierre were part of a car theft ring, and Marc and Bernard suspected them of double-crossing them. One of the vehicles that had been stolen in this car theft ring ended up being stolen from the people that stole it, which were Marc and Bernard. And they believed that it was Philip and Pierre that had stole this vehicle. So they wanted to torture them to find out where this truck was, because it was a truck. Philip's girlfriend was just collateral damage. They were drugged, and they were held hostage in another house, because he's got 7. Even on a fixed income, he's managed to do that and support children. The girlfriend managed to escape, and Philip and Pierre eventually were freed. And they told the police what happened. But it takes a while for the police to do anything. While the police are talking to Philip and Pierre and investigating that car theft thing and what happened to them, Marc became very paranoid about Bernard, and he turned on him. He drugged him. He brought him to the Marcinelle house. Melissa and Julie were still in that house. They were still in that dungeon, and they were half-starved. Marc brought those girls up from the dungeon. They had been there for 5 months.
Oh, my God.
By this time, continuously abused. They were so beaten down that they were allowed to roam freely in the upper 2 levels of the house. They weren't even going to try to escape. Marc then forced Bernard into the hellhole.
Really?
Yeah. He was tortured there for 6 days.
Wow.
As part of the torture, Marc placed clamps on Bernard's testicles.
Oh.
After 6 days, Marc roofied Bernard, put him in a van, and took him to a house in Sars-Bosia. It's a town in Belgium. He had a pre-dug grave there, and he threw the drugged-up Bernard in it and buried him alive.
Wow.
Comes around, goes around.
Wow.
Marc then went back to the Marcinelle home, and he forced Julie and Melissa back into the dungeon. Again, all of this is happening right under the police's nose.
I'm speechless.
Shortly thereafter Bernard's murder, on December 6th, Marc was arrested. But not for kidnapping, for car theft. After his arrest, he instructed his schoolteacher wife, Michele, who was pregnant with their 3rd child, to make sure that Julie and Melissa had enough food and water to survive in the secret room in the cellar while he was locked up. Now, Michele lived primarily in another house, but she went back to the Marcinelle house to feed a dog that they had left there. However, She never fed the girls any food or water, and in fact, the heat and the electricity were shut off.
No.
The girls were trapped in a dark, cold dungeon alone and left to starve. A week later, on December 13th, Officer Michele raided Marc's house as part of the car theft case, and he brought with him a locksmith. I'm not sure exactly why, but I guess they don't want to break down the door. Now keep in mind, the locksmith thinks he's only there for the car theft. He doesn't know about the kidnappings. Together, Officer Michele and the locksmith went into the cellar, and in that cellar, they found vaginal cream, a gynecological speculum, chloroform, and chains. And this is only 1 week after Marc's been gone. They also couldn't help but notice that on one of the walls, it was much newer than the other ones. It was clearly some sort of new construction. While they were down there, they could hear the sounds of children yelling faintly. Officer Michele argued with the locksmith that the children's voices were coming from outside. But the locksmith was adamant that they were coming from somewhere in that cellar. And he said, I'm not leaving this house until the cellar is ripped apart. But Officer Michele yelled at him and said, I'm the detective in charge. You're leaving this house with me right now. And they left.
Oh, I can't believe this.
However, Officer Michele did return to the home 6 days later. And when he did, he confiscated some videotapes he found there. He watched some of them. One was even labeled the name of a show that featured missing children. The ones he watched, there wasn't, I guess, anything interesting, so he didn't bother watching all the videos. Had he would have known that in one of the videos, Marc was building a secret room because Marc videotaped the whole process. And also on one of the videos, Marc could be seen raping a young girl from Slovakia. Instead, Officer Michele called off Operation Othello in the first week of January, and he returned most of the tapes back to Marc's wife, and the other ones he never told the local police about. After serving 4 months for car theft, Marc was released early as a result of his wife getting ready to give birth to their third child. When he returned to the Marcinelle home, he went to the prison cell he built, and he found Melissa and Julie dead inside. They had died a slow, agonizing death from the cold and lack of food and water. Obviously, they had survived at least a week with Marc gone because they were alive when Officer Michele was down in the cellar. He had 2 chances to find them, and he didn't.
If he wasn't so lazy and just watched the damn videos, he could have fast forwarded. You can watch it on fast forward.
You can do your dishes while you're watching them.
Hello.
I mean, whatever. Hello.
I mean, it's not like you don't know this guy has a record. People suspect him of kidnapping children and being a child molester. But no, I'm not going to watch them.
There were more tips that came in about Marc's behavior.
I'm enraged.
It was only 2 months later when Marc, along with his heroin addict accomplice, and this is a man named Michele Laviere. So I'm just going to call him Laviere because in this story there are 3 Michelles. That's when they kidnapped Sabine and moved her into the dungeon. Sabine had no idea she was stuck in the same place where 2 little girls had died only months earlier. As I said, Marc had left Sabine to go on a mission. After 5 days being gone, he came back. He brought Sabine up from the dungeon. He chained her to his bed by her neck, and he went to sleep. When he woke up, he suggested that Sabine write some letters to her family, and he offered to mail them for her. Of course, he didn't. He just put them under his doormat. He would then tell her as the days went by that her mom wrote her back, and he would read what was supposed to be a letter from her mom, telling Sabine that she needed to accept her fate and not complain about her living conditions. That's what Sabine was told.
That breaks my heart.
Once again, Marc left Sabine alone to go on another mission. While he was gone, the lights and the ventilator quit working. The power went out. This was terrifying to Sabine, and she thought she was going to suffocate in the squalid conditions. But thankfully, within minutes, the power came back on. And then within a few days, Marc returned. As the days went on, Sabine's health began declining. The sexual abuse caused her to hemorrhage nonstop. and she was in extreme pain. Because of the bleeding, Marc took her out of the dungeon and he chained her to his bed. He gave her Pampers to use to contain the bleeding, but they had to be changed every half hour.
Oh my God.
She was very ill. Eventually the hemorrhaging decreased and she got a little better and she was brought back down to the secret room in the cellar. Sabine constantly complained to Marc about her isolation, being away from her friends and the loneliness that she had. She actually begged him to have a friend with her. On August 8th, he told her he was leaving on another mission, and when he came back, he would have a friend for her.
This is so sad.
Before I tell you anything more, we're going to take a really quick break. As I said, Marc went on a mission to get a friend for Sabine. 14-year-old Letitia Delez was at a swimming pool in Beatrix with her sister and her sister's boyfriend and some of their friends. Because she was on her period, she didn't want to go swimming, and she eventually got bored watching everyone have fun. So she decided to walk back to her house, which was only a few blocks away. And this is about 18 miles from Marc's home. As she's walking, a beat-up van pulled up beside her, and the driver, the heroin addict, Lavier, asked her if there was anything interesting to do in the town of Beatrix. She told him about a 24-hour scooter-thon that was taking place, but he acted like he couldn't hear her. So she got a little closer, and as she did, Marc grabbed her from behind and he threw her in the van. There were some people nearby who watched what happened, and Marc turned to them very calmly and explained that Letitia was his daughter and she was very ill. In the van, Letitia was forced to swallow some pills with Coke, but she spit the pills into the Coke bottle, which caused it to foam up. Really oddly, Marc grabbed the Coke bottle and he drank the Coke.
Uh-oh.
Then he forced more pills down Letitia's throat. Letitia, like Sabine, was brought into the Marcinelle house in a metal trunk.
Oh.
The next day, Marc went down to the cellar and told Sabine in a really excited way that he had a new friend waiting for her upstairs. When Sabine was brought upstairs, she was taken to Marc's bedroom where she saw a naked Letitia chained to the bunk bed by her neck. She was passed out, probably from the drugs, and when Marc tried to arouse her, she couldn't get up. Eventually, he was able to wake the groggy girl up, and he urged Sabine to talk to her. In Letitia's doped up state, she asked Sabine, "How long have you been here?" And by that time, it had been 77 days. Later, Letitia, Sabine, and Marc all sat around a kitchen table, and Marc offered them food, but Letitia refused to eat. Afterwards, both girls were brought down to the cellar and into that secret room, and Letitia was introduced to the tiny hellhole that would become her home. When the two girls were locked in it, there was just literally no room for either one of them to move.
It probably just fit the bed, I'm thinking.
Yeah, pretty much. That's exactly it. While they were down there, obviously they had nothing else to do but talk. And Sabine got her first glimpse of hope when Letitia told her that everyone had been looking for her.
Oh.
And pictures were plastered all over Belgium. The police had used helicopters and bloodhounds in the immediate days following Sabine's disappearance. And Sabine heard for the first time that her parents were desperate to get her back.
Oh.
Sabine was stunned by this after just spending months assuming no one cared about her. People did care about the missing girls, and when Letitia was kidnapped, her small town treated it like World War III. The local police were determined to find her. Besides the witnesses who were told that Letitia was Marc's ill daughter, other people came forward describing what they'd seen. A nun who was just really annoyed by the loud sounds of the van's broken exhaust system, had looked out her window, and so she was able to describe to the police that the van had stickers that were all over its windows. And a 22-year-old student, he was on his bike, and he remembered the first 3 letters of the license plate because it reminded him of his sister's name. And I don't know what those letters were, but that's how he was able to remember it. After a few days, the police were able to trace the plate to Marc. And on August 11th, Marc and his wife, Michele, were arrested when they were standing outside in their garden. Marc was completely taken by surprise. His accomplice Michele Laviere, was also arrested. That same day, with a search warrant in hand, authorities raided the Marcinelle house looking for Letitia. But even after entering the cellar, they didn't find her. And they weren't really looking for Sabine because I think maybe they thought
she was probably dead.
I don't think they expected to find her. After 2 days of interrogation, Laviere eventually told the police about the secret hiding place. And then they talked to Marc, and he admitted having this secret room. This is really odd. The police took Marc out of custody, and they brought him to the Marcinelle house's cellar. And they had him open the doors. When he did, Letitia and Sabine were frightened to see this group of men behind him. But Marc reassured the girls that the men were really police and they were safe to come out. And he's the one that ushered them out. Both girls were so happy that as they were crawling out of their dungeon, they each gave Marc a kiss on his cheek.
What?
They were just so happy. The media was there when the girls were reunited with their family, and it was shared to the world. I watched it. It's super sweet, but it just seems really odd to me that I was watching this take place. You'd think that'd be a private moment, but it was very nice. Back in jail, Marc made more astonishing admissions to the police, and he eventually led them to the graves of Melissa, Julie, Anne, Afia, and Bernard. According to Marc, he was just a small player in a really large pedophile ring that spanned over Eastern Europe, and it included very powerful men. And we're going to circle back to this. The police went and they dug up the victims' bodies. Melissa's parents were really furious, and this makes me really upset too. They weren't allowed to identify Melissa, and they really wanted to. The police said, no, you don't want to see her. And you know who they had identify Melissa's body?
Marc?
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
No. I know. The parents were very upset. The man that Marc identified as his boss was a very successful Brussels businessman named Jean-Michel Nihoul. I'm just going to call him Nihoul. Marc claimed that he was the ringleader of the organization. Nihoul was arrested a few days later for supplying Marc with 1,000 ecstasy pills. He gave them for free to Marc immediately after Letitia's kidnapping, probably as some sort of payment for her. And Nihoul, when I say he was a powerful businessman, he had a radio station, and he sometimes broadcast himself on the radio station. He owned a pub. He was big into sex orgies. And he hung out with some of the most powerful politicians and other businessmen and bankers in Belgium. Marc's wife, Anne Laviere, both said that Marc would get orders from higher ups for particular types of girls. And in addition, they said that Sabine had been surveilled by Marc for weeks. He would watch her go on her way to school before he decided it was time to snatch her. In the end, 29 people were arrested in connection with the pedophile and the car theft ring.
29 people?
7 of them were police officers.
What?
But it would take years for anyone to be brought to justice. And when I say years, Tani, do you know how long it took before Marc had a trial?
Oh my God, how many?
8.
Holy shit.
During that time, even more shocking revelations were uncovered. The judge in the case was Judge Jean-Marc Conneroute. He was deemed a national hero because he actually, at the time, participated in the capture of Marc. He was there. I think he was a prosecutor who got promoted to a judge. I'm not sure how it works in Belgium, but he's now the judge on the case. He urged any other victims of Marc or the pedophile ring to come forward, and many females did. But shortly thereafter, Judge Conneroute was removed from the case because he attended a fundraiser for the missing and murdered girls' families. His dismissal outraged the people of Belgium because he was the only guy they really trusted. He found the girls, and they believed in him, while they obviously doubted the rest of the police force and the government at this point. To demonstrate their outrage on the way the case was handled and the judge's dismissal, 300,000 people gathered in what was called the White March in Brussels. And it was this huge event with balloons. The people in Belgium, anybody in Belgium listening knows this story because it's really affected the heart of the country. Meanwhile, while they're trying to prepare for the trial, as I said, more victims came forward. Their names were kept private, and they were referred to by X's. There was X1 through X9. Their statements to the police later became known as the Belgium X-Files. Those in power tried to discredit the women, but documents later found by WikiLeaks helped support some of their terrifying tales. I'm just going to briefly summarize the X-Files. And I have a part 2 to this that is all about the X-Files, but it's the most brutal thing you'll ever listen to. It's so horrible that I don't want to believe it's true. The first ex-victim to come forward, her name was Regina Luff. She was married with 4 children and owned a dog kennel, a successful one. At the age of 12, her grandmother and her parents pimped her out to a pedophile named Tony. He was in his mid-40s, and he would take her to these sex parties. At these parties, Marc was very young, but she recognized him as being there. And Marc used to be a male prostitute in his teens. He started when he was 14. So he probably found some pedophiles when he was doing that. Nihu was also at the party. Marc's job was to supply drugs to the young girls to subdue them. Nihu hosted the parties, and there were prominent politicians, businessmen, bankers. At these parties, young children were raped, tortured, and even murdered for entertainment.
Really?
Regina told authorities that in 1984, she saw a young girl tortured and murdered in a large building that was connected to a mushroom farm. What she described matched the unsolved murder of Kristen Van Hayes. Regina claims that Kristen's neck was tied to her hands behind her back and then tied to her legs behind her back, and that each time she moved, she strangled herself. She also described a nail being hammered into Kristen's left wrist. Ugh. She said there were roughly 8 men there, including Marc and Nihu, and they all watched Kristen die. Kristen went to the same ice rink that Marc went to, and she also hung out at a swimming pool right next to Nihu's radio station that he often went to. Marc got kicked out of the local ice skating rink because he got caught trying to molest girls. He would intentionally knock them down and then help pick them up.
And grope them?
And other things he got caught doing. So he was a creep at ice skating rinks, and he did go to the same one that Kristen went to. The police were working on this case, and they believed Regina's account of what happened. As I said, the injuries she mentioned were found on Kristen's body. Regina also described 2 other murders that she witnessed that police think are linked to 2 unsolved homicides that they knew of. Another one of the ex-witnesses came forward to lend credibility to Regina's statements. This ex-witness had actually gone to the police before Dutroux was even arrested or anything, and described the horrible events she experienced in the network of pedophiles. Another one of the ex-women had spoken to a therapist years earlier and described very similar things to Regina. In addition, one of the exes, X2, she was a female police officer, and she was sitting in the meetings about Regina's statements. And during the meetings, people there noticed she got really upset. Her superior officer talked to her, and that's when X2 opened up and said that she had experienced the same things that Regina did. She'd been a victim of the pedophile network, and she gave explicit details. She named names, and all these women name names. I'm not going to because I don't want to get sued. But they all name names, and they're all in the X-Files. What lends even more credibility to these women's statements is that a few of them confessed to participating in the mutilation and murder of other children. They were forced to do it.
Oh.
So they wouldn't tell anybody because
Right.
now they're part of it. As the investigation into the X-Files moved forward, the police in charge of it, there was 2 prominent ones. They were accused of manipulating information and feeding it to Regina. The officers on the case and Regina were just vilified by the media, and eventually the police officers were charged with corruption. They went to court over it, and they were acquitted, and in fact, they were monetarily compensated. However, their careers were ruined. The Belgium authorities dismissed the pedophile network. They refused to continue pursuing that angle and insisted that Marc Dutroux acted alone. Even though some of the parents of the victims that I talked about in this story believe There's definitely a pedophile ring, and they believe the X-File women's statements. The Belgium authorities no longer cared what the victims' parents thought.
Kind of reminds me of Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
Like, there has to be more.
Yeah. Documents from WikiLeaks showed that Marc Dutroux and his wife received payments in their personal bank accounts from countries such as Saudi Arabia and Morocco right after girls turned up missing. As I said, the X-Files basically got buried. The information wasn't released to the public, but someone leaked the info to 2 journalists who were later sued for revealing prosecutorial secrets. They wrote a really damning book, which convinced many people that the X-File victims were credible. The plethora of details provided by the X-Files witnesses is just way too much for me to go into in this episode. I did get a translated copy of the X-Files dossier, and I'm putting it on our website so you guys can all read it. But I'm going to tell you, it is the worst thing I've ever read. It's 42 pages long. I did make a part 2 to this, and it was one of the worst things I've ever written. And you can find that on our website, tntcrimes.com. Anyway, I'm not going into it in this episode. It's just too horrific. In addition, about 20 witnesses with information on pedophile rings and on this case died in really strange circumstances before they had a chance to speak with the police. So we're waiting for the trial. Time goes by. In 2002, Jean-Michel Nihoul greeted a journalist and agreed to be interviewed for a documentary. And when he showed up to talk to some of the people making it, he started out by saying, "Hi, I'm the Monster of Belgium." And he was very touchy-feely, and he made one of the interviewers extremely uncomfortable. During the interview, he said that he was untouchable because he had information on high officials in the Belgian government that could destroy Belgium. So he knew he would be safe. After 8 years, Marc, his wife Michele, and the driver of the van, Lavier, and Nihoul were the only ones that went to trial for the kidnapping, rapes, and murders of the girls. Marc was sentenced to life in prison, but he still gets chances to be paroled. You're going to be really pissed when I tell you this part. Michele, his wife, she got sentenced to 30 years, but she was released in August of 2012 at the age of 52. The driver of the van, he got 25 years and can be released when he can show that he could be an apprentice for someone. He hasn't been able to meet the qualifications for the parole. Nihoul was acquitted of all charges except for drug trafficking. He died in 2019, but to this day, many people believe he's the true Monster of Belgium. We know for a fact that many accomplices were never prosecuted, and to this day, we don't know the true number of Marc's victims. Sabine Dardenne wrote a book called I Choose to Live, which is where I got a lot of information on this case. On our website, there's a video from one of the women in the X-Files. This woman was treated with a lot of respect because prior to anything with Marc Dutroux coming out, she had been an advocate for children abused sexually. So she was treated with a lot of respect, and you can watch that video and decide for yourself what you think if she's telling the truth. And that is the story of the Monster of Belgium.
I'm blown away. It's disgusting. Damn, Talia. I feel like I need a shower now after hearing that.
Well, wait till I make you sit through part 2. You don't even know.
No.
I want to thank you guys all for taking the time to listen to us. If you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe/follow button. You can go to our website to get all the information I was talking to you about. That's tntcrimes.com. There's going to be a part 2. I only recommend it if you can handle the most disgusting things you've ever heard in your life. The link to that's on our website, and you can also get it as a Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/tntcrimes, you can join us. We have so many unreleased episodes. In it, we're much more crass, drop a lot of F-bombs, and you get a little more of our true character coming out. Anything else, Tanya?
I think you covered it.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening to us.
Until next time.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.